Evening, everybody. So, awesome to be here. I actually just moved here a few months ago, so Steve asked me if I wouldn't mind speaking, and I thought, good way to meet some people. And I thought I would introduce you to a project that I'm working on, which hopefully will resonate a bit with some people, and there's also a part of it that is very much portable, and hopefully some other people can find some cool things to do with it. I actually work for Automatic, which is the company behind WordPress.com, and we do a bunch of other things, Gravatar, Intense Debate, VaultPress, VideoPress, Akismet, Poldaddy, probably leaving something out, but that's about it. So anyway, yeah, we'll do questions. Feel free to interrupt me. This is kind of going to be a little bit rambly storytelling. So feel free to interrupt me, and then we can do questions at the end as well. The beginning sort of 3/4 of this are going to be applicable to everybody. And then depending on how technical people want to get, we can dive into some of the plugins that I'm going to talk about at the very end, and about how they might be useful for other people, both just to use like as they are, and also as the foundation of writing your own plugins. So, as it says, I've been working with WordPress for about 7 years. I've been with Automatic for just over 3.5 years now. I'm Australian, that's the funny accent, and I now live in Brooklyn. But so, as you would have seen, this talk is about using WordPress as sort of a digital hub or home, and the reason that I think that's important is because we leave a lot of digital footprints on the internet. I've been using, well, I guess I've been on the web since '96, which is a while now. I don't want to do that math. But so I've been using things online for a long time. And in sort of the last decade or so, a lot of that use has produced digital footprints, has produced stuff that lives on the internet and is now permanent. And most of that stuff is not in my control. And it's probably the same for most of you. So who's ever heard of Delicious? Who uses Delicious? Or who used Delicious? And who still uses Delicious? There's a few of us. I'm in that camp. I have 4... You feel better? So for those of you who don't know, Delicious is basically a bookmarking web service. So it's a website, you go there, you save links to stuff, you can put a comment on it and tag it. From memory, it was created about 2004, and I actually have 1,400 bookmarks on there, going back as far as 2004. So that's a lot of content. All of that stuff is tagged. Most of it has a comment, an annotation with it of some sort. And obviously, whatever it was, I cared about it enough to click a button or go to a website or whatever it was, and that process changed over the years. But what about Flickr? Who used to use Flickr? Who now uses Flickr? Okay, a couple of you. So Flickr is a photo sharing web service, basically. It's got kind of a weird history, which we won't bother going too deep on. But basically, it's a photo sharing service. You publish your photos there, and there's a whole community around people sharing photos. Same sort of thing there. First photo I uploaded was 2004, which was actually the year that Flickr started. I now have 3,700 photos on Flickr. Again, titles, descriptions, tags. I don't want to do it, but if you added up the amount of time that I'd spent curating my own photos to get them onto Flickr, not to mention the actual upload speed, especially in 2004, that's a lot of time. That's a big investment. Okay? Another investment, Foursquare. Who uses Foursquare? Made in New York, right? You should all be using it. I've checked into 2,500 different places on Foursquare. The first of which was at South by Southwest in 2009. A lot of those check-ins have comments that, like some sort of a annotation that I put on that. Maybe it was like, I checked in when I got here. So I said, you know, getting sorted out to speak at the WordPress NYC. Some of them have photos attached to them. Some of them have references to friends now that they can do that. It's a bunch of important data there. Instagram. I've got 200 photos on Instagram. Started posting them 2 years ago. There's a bunch of, again, like this is a huge amount of work that I've put into these things, and then what have I done with this content? I've just put it out on the internet, right? I've sort of thrown it out into the stream, and if people pick it up, they pick it up, but I can't easily get it back. Twitter, this is a big one. I have almost 9,000 tweets on my account. I have user ID number 977 on Twitter. First one I posted was in 2006. There's a ridiculous amount of content on there. But what about my blog? The one thing that I control, out of all of those things, the one place that I've controlled for the longest, I might add, since 2003, I have 330 posts on it. Pretty pathetic, right? That's not a lot. I mean, it's long form, it's a lot more thoughtful, it's probably a lot higher quality. A lot of it combines different media types. It's got images, it's got maps, it's got all sorts of stuff. But this is the one piece of content out of all of that I control. It's in WordPress. I can import it and export it in a format that's pretty easy to work with. I mean, it's in a MySQL database that I have control over. And being a developer, I have like more control over it than a lot of people would. But still, I have significantly more control over my 330 posts than I do over my approximately 11,000 other pieces of data that I publish. You have no control over that other stuff. You put all this stuff out there, and you have zero control over it. Let's look at that. Delicious. So, been publishing all these bookmarks. The service, was created back in the day. In 2005, Delicious was acquired by Yahoo. At the time, Yahoo was doing quite well, probably better than they are now. At the end of 2010, there was a huge shutdown scare. A memo was leaked from Yahoo that inferred that Delicious was going to get shut down. Everybody freaked out. Turns out what they actually meant was that they were selling it, which arguably was just as bad. So they sold it to some other company who came in and was not very community-minded. They basically dropped a bunch of features, changed a bunch of things, really didn't involve the community at all. Heaps of people stopped using Delicious, either before, during, or after that whole sort of drama. Delicious is actually a really cool service now, I think, and I think it's better off now than it was before. But still, that's like in amongst all of that shuffle, if Yahoo had decided that, hey, this is not profitable and we can't sell it, if they just shut it down, I would have lost all of my bookmarks. It would have been less than 1,400 at the time, but they would have all been gone and there's nothing I could have done about it. At the time, I don't believe they even had an export facility, so I didn't even really have many options then. Flickr, another one, acquired by Yahoo. No trends here, not trying to like bag on Yahoo. But so Yahoo acquired Flickr. Arguably, they've let it languish since they acquired it. When they acquired it, Flickr was absolutely on a hockey stick of adoption. Most people who are vocal of their opinions think that Yahoo completely screwed up that acquisition and what they did with it after that. They forced your account to merge with the Yahoo account. They changed a bunch of things around. Well, when they bothered to do anything, they made a lot of decisions that most people weren't very happy with. But same sort of thing. Again, in 2010, they had a major round of layoffs, and Flickr was specifically targeted internally as we need to cut some of these people. So they lost a lot of their engineering effort. Basically, they weren't, the people who were now running Flickr were not interested in running Flickr. And I have a bunch of content there. I'm really worried about it. Not only is it full of metadata, but it is a lot of quote-unquote physical. It would take a long time to download it, and it's really difficult to download things like images. Instagram is actually pretty good on this sort of front of things, but until recently, they didn't even have a web presence, basically. Didn't even, literally until a few weeks ago, didn't have profiles. So there was nowhere I could easily link people to go see my stuff. They had to be using the app. It was really difficult to make use of Instagram photos until people started bolting things onto it. Now they've been acquired by Facebook, so who knows what's going to happen there. Twitter is actually the reason that this whole thing got started. I Who knows how many of your own tweets you have access to? How many?
3,000?
3,200. So I have 8,900 tweets. As far as Twitter is concerned, I can only access 3,200 of those tweets. This is apparently a technical limitation of their infrastructure, and they're working on it, which they've been doing for well over a year. And basically what happened was, somehow it came out that you could only access 3,200 of your own content. And so I was at 3,100 tweets, approximately, when I found this out. Which is what started my whole pursuit of reclaiming my content and making sure that I had control over it. Or at the very, very least, a backup in some format that I could work with. So in the space of 100 tweets, which at the time took a little bit longer, I wrote like the beginnings of an importer to pull tweets into WordPress, which we'll look at. We'll actually look at about 5 generations down from that. But that spawned this whole process of how do you get content out of all of these different services and get it into WordPress. I love this quote. It's actually cut up. I have a link down the bottom where it came from. But I love this quote. It's from a meta filter discussion about user-generated content. I think that kind of sums up what a lot of people don't realize. When you're using a service for free, if you're not paying for anything, it's because you and your data is being sold to someone. Whether it's for advertising or whether it's for analytics or whatever it's for, you're the product. And I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem with this fact. What I have a problem with is that I'm not willing to completely give up all control of my content just to be some product. I'm happy for them to sort of rent me out, as long as I'm getting utility from whatever service this is. But at the end of the day, I want my content, right? So what's the solution? Well, I mean, I've been talking for whatever it is, 10, 15 minutes already. We had a WordPress meetup, so WordPress, duh. Obviously we're going to talk about using WordPress to solve this problem. So you're already using WordPress to blog. Probably that means you're writing longer form content within WordPress. That's what I use it for. When I'm in the WordPress dashboard, basically all I'm doing is writing longer form, more thoughtful prose of some sort. You've got thousands of powerful themes. Who's a theme developer in here, or has modified a theme in any way? Okay, so like you have at least a vague understanding of, you can do some pretty amazing things with WordPress themes. It's one of the things that sets WordPress apart from a lot of other platforms, is that the themes are actually potentially just as powerful as WordPress. They're just PHP. You can do literally whatever you want with them. You have full access to the code. WordPress is really optimized towards a good publishing flow for longer form content, but also towards displaying loads of content. Like that's, a large part of WordPress is rendering stuff in a theme, displaying it to users, which is what we need because we're going to have a lot of data if we start pulling all this stuff back in. And that's a problem. All that data. I mentioned 11,000. I forget what my current number is. It's 11,000 and something pieces of data of all of this stuff. And so I thought, oh, that's easy. I'll write importers and I'll pull it all into WordPress, and it'll just be posts in there, and I'll stuff it all in there, and I'll have a theme and it'll display it. Done. Easy. It turns out there's a reason why all these different platforms focus on different types of content. And they tend to have very different UIs. Like, they look very different, right? Displaying a tweet compared to displaying a high-resolution photo compared to displaying a check-in at a physical location. They're all kind of different problems. So, I mean, in my selection of data, I've got images, locations, links, short-form text, and the old standby long-form text. And I'm trying to display this all in the same theme. So I went looking for a theme, and I couldn't find one. So I started writing my own, which we'll get to later. But let's talk about the decision that I made, which was to pull my content in. There's actually 2 diametrically opposed approaches here. Yeah?
Do you also use it as a platform for pushing it out from there?
That's exactly what we're about to talk about. So the question was, do I actually use WordPress to push content out or only pull it in? So this is what I was just about to say, is there are two completely reversed ways of looking at this problem. And a guy by the name of Untitled Chapter with a friend of his, Will Norris, both of whom are have been working in the personal syndication and online identity spaces, micro formats, a bunch of related technologies. They came up with these two terms, the first of which is POSSE, which stands for Publish Own Site, Syndicate Elsewhere. So the idea here is exactly what you were asking, is use WordPress, type up whatever I'm doing or upload an image, hit publish, and then optionally push that content out to a different platform, right? So we actually have this on WordPress.com. We call it Publicize. There's 1,000 plugins that you can get that'll do this for you, where you do all of your publishing in WordPress, and either the full content or a link at least goes out to one of these other platforms. The reverse of that is called PESOS, and this is basically what I opted for, which is publish elsewhere, syndicate into your own site. Obviously these are kind of contrived acronyms, and I'm not just all about the money, but this is what I opted for. The reason that I opted for this is, as I said, it's really difficult to handle all of these different data formats. And one half of that equation is displaying it. The other half is creating some sort of an experience for posting that content, creating that content in the first place. So, for example, when I checked in here, I open the Foursquare app, and it picks up that I'm near Newark City, and it says, do you want to check in? And I hit a button, and I hit go, and that's it. Do I really want to create a plugin for WordPress that uses some HTML5 geolocation API that can hopefully get as accurate as Foursquare, and then I'm probably going to have to use their API to narrow down my results so that I can get a list of likely locations, and I'm going to check in, then I've got to put that in WordPress somehow, then I've got to write something to talk to the Foursquare API again so they can publish it out there anyway. That's a whole lot of messing around. What I would rather do is let them specialize in what they're doing, which is building an awesome API and a great experience around storing location data, and then pull that content back into my copy of WordPress. That's the choice I made. I know other people, for example, Tantek Chelik is actually doing the exact opposite of that. He's taking the POSSE approach, where he publishes to his own website and then syndicates it out to other locations.
Who is his?
His name's Tantek Chelik. It's T-A-N-T-E-K C-E-L-I-K, and it's Turkish, so the C has a funny thing on the bottom. I don't know what it's called. I think his website's just tantek.com or tantek.me. But anyway, so I opted for this. Depending on what you wanted to do, you could do it the other way around. But I'm going to talk about the technical side of how I did this. So what I did was I looked at, as I said, the early days I wrote a Twitter importer, right? So a few years ago, Twitter allowed you to access public timelines via RSS. No problem. First of all, WordPress already has an RSS importer, so I could have used that, which I sort of based things on that. And then I had it just access my public feed periodically, download that content, parse it, stick it in my WordPress database as a post. Easy. Then they made JSON feeds available. That makes it even easier to work with, so I used those instead. And then they started requiring authorization to use anything. And that threw a huge spanner in the works. Who's ever worked with OAuth? A lot of lucky people in the room, not the ones with their hands up. So OAuth is basically an authentication system that allows you to delegate the authority for someone else to access data on your behalf. So in the case of my importer, what I needed was I needed to be able to delegate the authority to access my Twitter account to my WordPress install so that it could download my content on my behalf. And this was something that Twitter has relatively recently started requiring, or I think they're in the throes of requiring, and most of the other services required it all along. But so the problem that poses is now I have to write all of this authentication code. And there are libraries available to work with Twitter and to work with Flickr and whatever, but they're all pretty similar. So what I needed was, well, I decided that I needed, I'm an engineer, so I'm always trying to solve the big problem. I decided that I needed an authentication system that was web service agnostic. So basically a bunch of code that could handle authentication with any web service that you threw at it. And so I started working on this thing which I called Keyring. And basically the idea with Keyring is that it is exactly that. It's a library that doesn't really do anything on its own. You can't like install Keyring and then click around and be like, wow, Keyring is so awesome. That's not what you're going to do. If you're a developer though, you might require your users to install Keyring because it will handle authentication for you. So basically, Keyring gets installed, and then as a plugin developer, you can say, hey Keyring, give me a connection to Twitter. And Keyring will say, oh yeah, I have like this list of 5 connections that these users have already created. Pick one of those. Or I don't have one yet. Do you want me to just send the user to Twitter and connect them up? And if that's what it does, then when it comes back, you just get a token and you get access to it through Keyring, and you can easily use that to make requests without having to worry about any of the authentication stuff at all. So I started working on that. That ended up taking quite a while. And it's still under development, but it works enough for me to build I guess it's kind of a plugin package called Keyring, very creative with names, obviously. Keyring Social Importers. So basically, this is a collection of importers that bolt into WordPress. They all use a common base of code, and they will import content from Delicious, Flickr, Foursquare, Instagram, and Twitter. So they'll basically, when you connect them up and you create a connection to Twitter, you can say, go get as many tweets as you can get, which in this case is 3,200. Thank you, Twitter. And then every hour it will download new tweets. It will also download new Flickr photos, new Instagram photos. Any new content that it can get every hour, it will automatically download it and publish it to your blog. What I wanted to do though, as I said, this whole sort of quest was to get my data back. So for things like Instagram and Flickr in particular, just getting a link to my photo on Flickr isn't good enough. I want the actual photo. So the Keyring social importers will actually sideload any media that they can find, and they'll actually download it to your server, save it in your media library, and when they publish a post on WordPress, they'll reference the local copy rather than the remote copy. By default, they create links back to the original page, because that's probably where conversation is happening and things like that. But yeah, they basically try to pull as much data as possible out of whatever service they're connected to, and actually save a copy of the raw import data as well. So there are some elements in there that I don't work with for whatever reason, but it saves the whole block, and you can work with it later if you wanted to. And all of the posts that it creates, they're all actually saved as normal posts, and then they're using post formats, and so that they can sort of indicate that this is an aside or an image or whatever. So I have all of these, and I have Keyring, which gives me authentication, and I have the importers, which connect to each of the different services. And I've got all this stuff working, and I'm pulling all this content down, and I've got my 11,000 pieces of stuff in WordPress, and I activate the 2012 theme, and it's ridiculous. Like, it's completely unusable. It works, I mean, totally works, but no one would ever look at this site. Like, it's horrible. It's like tweet, retweet, retweet, @reply, Foursquare check-in that doesn't show anything other than like checked in at New York City. Whoop-de-doo. Once in a while there's an image, that's nice. But basically a normal theme, when you throw this much data at it, this is useless. So I decided that I need to build my own theme to deal with all of this stuff, and I decided to call it Homeroom. It's not released yet, so don't bother searching for it, but it's slowly getting closer, and I'll show you it right now. think I'm going to move this over here. Yes. So I don't seem to have, wow, this is really difficult from over here. I don't seem to have an internet connection. So I'm going to have to just sort of show you as much as I can without the connection. So basically what we're seeing here is, by the way, this is very ugly at the moment. I'm a developer, not a designer. Luckily I have designer friends, so it'll be less ugly when it finally gets released. So the first thing that you're seeing there is a tweet. This is actually in really ugly format because the internet isn't working. Normally this would be a Twitter embed, if you've seen those. There's an option that you can say just display it like this, but the Twitter embed ones have like retweet and things like that. You'll notice this little bit here. So what it's done here is, one of the things that I started noticing is I'll often have a string of 10 tweets in a row. And when you're looking on Twitter, that's fine because they're probably interspersed with other people's tweets. But when you're looking on my website, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like I'm just yelling into a vacuum, which arguably is what Twitter is. But so what I did was basically implemented this idea of look ahead within a theme. So as it's outputting, as soon as it's finished outputting one post, it looks ahead to the next post to see what it is. And if it's a tweet, and the last one was a tweet, and I haven't crossed into the next day yet, then I do this collapse thing. And if I click on that, then I get to see those tweets as well. So it'll do that with as many as there are within the same day. So that's one of the sort of little tricks that I started looking at. This is a link posted on Delicious. And I haven't finished formatting all of this by a long shot, but just to give you an idea of sort of a couple of the little weird quirks that I had to deal with. Another tweet. There's got 4 more on that day. You'll see that this is pulled out a tag, so I hashtag within my tweet. When everything's imported, the importer will detect those and apply those as tags within WordPress. So then you've got that data, you can do something useful with it. This is another link in Delicious. This was an Instagram photo. And I've got a little rollover thing for the title. That link will actually go back to Instagram. What I haven't done yet is pulling down comments and likes and things like that, but that's actually pretty easy to do now. This is amazing, and unfortunately you can't see it. So basically what happens here is, one of the things I really quickly noticed was Foursquare check-ins are really not very interesting. In the normal flow of a blog, like dedicating a huge block like that to say checked in at some place, if that's all I did, if I didn't post a photo, didn't put a comment on it, all I did was checked in, it's total overkill to give it this huge block, right? So what I do instead is I actually exclude those from all of the main flow, and then after each post gets output, I'm doing a check to see if the day has changed. And if the day changes, I go and do a query over the previous day, or the previous day back to the last piece of content. So if it was a week since I posted something, theoretically it would cover that week. And it gets all of the check-ins in that period. And this would actually be a Google map with all of those points on it. So each day you can get a little, oh, this is everywhere that I went. Yeah, questions?
Could I just use a hashtag on my tweets to define which one could actually be published in each feed and the rest are just archived?
Not yet, but there's nothing stopping you from doing that at all. And actually, if nothing else, you could pretty easily do that on this end by excluding all tweets and only including the ones with certain tags within WordPress, because that hashtag would get converted.
So you do hashtag WP or hashtag...
Yep, exactly. Another question?
Yeah, is there a reason you haven't mentioned Facebook on here? Is it not possible?
There is. Good question. So the reason that I haven't mentioned Facebook is because I haven't figured out how I want to tackle them yet. And the reason for that is because they have the most complex privacy protocols of all of them. I'm probably something in here violates someone's privacy policy. I don't personally care much because it's my data in the first place. As far as I'm concerned, I have the right to at least get my own stuff back. Facebook is a little bit different because they have a lot of privacy controls around you know, like Steve might post something, and because I'm friends with him, I'll see it, and he might comment on my data, which I'll see, but he doesn't want other people to see that, and he's restricted his post, so I shouldn't be pulling that down and then publishing it on my website, right? So basically, the reason I haven't done anything with them is because I don't know what to do yet. But if anyone has any good ideas, I'm all ears. I think that's probably the most exciting bits on here. Luckily I had this one loaded. This is one of the random things you see on the subway here. So this is an Instagram photo that was posted with a comment. So this is the comment that was included with the Instagram photo, which is all downloaded obviously. It also has location data. Any post that has location data, it gets stored in the sort of WordPress recommended way to store geodata, and automatically gets a map added to it. I just started working on how the comments will work. So this is actually using Jetpack comments. One of the things I do at WordPress.com is I work on the team that builds most of Jetpack, which is a plugin that we build to try and get WordPress.com features onto self-hosted sites. And so for some reason I wanted to make this harder for myself and decided that I would integrate as heavily as possible with all of the Jetpack features. So one of them is the comments, which is this neat little commenting system. If I wasn't logged in, I could log in through Twitter and Facebook. And I've got like my threaded comment stuff down here. And one thing down the bottom here, this is the infinite scroll. So you'll be able to click and it'll just keep loading them, keep adding them onto the page. But yeah, so this is sort of where it stands at the moment. It's turned into a pretty sprawling project. Do you have a question just there?
Are they all coming in as regular posts, or when they come in, are they being segregated?
Yeah, so they're all actually posts, but they all have a specific post format applied to them.
Is there a way in the dashboard to sort easily?
Actually, that's a really good question. Let's see if I can see enough to do this. Luckily, this is all running locally. So no, there wasn't. But that was part of one of the modifications that I made. So basically, this is, what have I got? 11,231. And actually, that's not counting my blog posts. That's only the social stuff. This is a test site. So these, all of these are normally here, except for this one, which is for formats. I'm actually going to submit a patch for core and see if they'll take it, because I think anyone who starts using formats heavily, you realize that there's no easy way to find them all. So I basically just added a drop down here, and I can say, like, find me all of my asides, which is what I use to store tweets. And then you can combine those with the other ones. So that's the best way to manage them at the moment.
Are you also targeting them as they come in?
Yeah, so some of these ones, these are tweets in particular, so that if a hashtag is in the tweet, it detects that and it uses those as tags within WordPress. My personal favorite one is this one. And then take this off. I lived in California for 7 years, so every single Friday I eat a burrito. And I've got to say that this city is pretty sad on the burrito front. But anyway, so you'll see that some of these are asides and statuses. So status means I checked in somewhere, so I can go back and see everywhere that I've eaten a burrito on a Friday. And then the asides will be tweets that I tweeted at the same time. Usually they're the same thing. So this is another issue that you start dealing with, is I need to do some deduplication, which I haven't done yet. If I go and take a photo on Instagram and then tag a location and tweet it at the same time, that's 3 pieces of data. Because I now have an Instagram photo, a Foursquare check-in, and a tweet. And technically, they're all the same thing. Once I pull them all back into the same place, it doesn't make much sense to have them appear one after the other. What you want to do is merge them somehow and figure out a good way to display that. Did you have a question over there?
Yeah. Are you considering putting together an analytic of where your posts, or in whatever format, were first posted for analytics of copyright purposes?
Oh, right. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good idea.
And
Yeah.
I'll tell you where to get a good food.
Ooh, I will talk to you later. Question?
Are you familiar with Overblog?
Vaguely, yes. I haven't looked into them in detail.
Well, actually,
They do
what
something
they're
vaguely
doing
like this,
is
right?
They're pulling in your social feeds, and they assign a permalink to each post that you do. They have not solved the. I put the same thing on Instagram and Twitter, and it shows up 3 times with the same photo. But you can filter it by like, don't like on Twitter, don't give me anything except stuff with links and photos, so you can take out tweets and retweets and that kind of stuff. So I think it would be worthwhile to just look to see what they've done and take a peek at their code. And see if they
Interesting.
They're struggling, but they got a lot. They seem to have a lot of money, so they're going to keep beating on it. They're from France.
They've got some time
then. Apparently, it's popular in Europe, and they're trying to bring it in. In the middle of it is going to be the Overblog blog, and then surrounded by all the social feed.
Interesting. I'll check them out a little bit later. Yeah.
Why did you?
Sorry, it's called Overblog.
Why did you decide to use post formats instead of post types?
Good question. So the question down here was, why did I decide to use post formats versus post types? And the original version of my Twitter importer actually did use post types. But basically what it comes down to is, if you use post types, you end up having to write a bunch of custom stuff to get them to behave anything like normal posts. And at the end of the day, I felt like most of this data, some of it probably there's really good argument to do it not as post formats, to do it as post types. But the majority of it, I felt like it actually made more sense as post types, as like actual posts, using post formats, because that actually allows you to then get all of the benefits of most plugins work with actual normal posts. For example, this page is this is a normal permalink in WordPress. This is just a standard post piece of content. I must have scrolled on that. But for example, Jetpack comments wouldn't work if this was a custom post type. And I didn't actually know that at the time. But that was the logic that leads to that was part of my decision. It was basically most plugins or add-ons or anything that you see written, unless it's sort of its own self-contained package, it expects something to be a post if it's kind of postish for you to get any extra functionality. And I wanted people to be able to use that. When I wrote the first Twitter importer and it was custom post types, I started realizing like I can't do anything with this stuff. Like it's here, I've got a copy of it, which is great. And so I ended up having to write a script to convert it all to posts and then hide it from the rest of my blog. But yeah, basically within WordPress, if you want to interact with anything that's not something that you're writing, I find it easier to just make something a post and then sort of use post formats where it makes sense.
So using Keyring, it's as simple as installing Keyring, the social importers, and then authenticating your own accounts.
Yes.
Logging into Twitter, logging into Facebook. Not Facebook, so Instagram.
I actually do have a connector for Facebook, but not an importer. So unfortunately I can't show you that whole process because I don't have connectivity, but I can show you some bits. I won't show you the code just yet. Oh, this is really confusing. So when we're in the admin, basically Keyring creates, and this is, it's basically got a really rudimentary UI just because it's purely for authentication. So if you just install Keyring, which no normal user would ever do, or should ever do, you can still go in and actually have services. They're called services in Keyring. Basically, all of the code written to know what to do to make a connection to these different services. And so if I was online, I could click on any of those. It would take me to that service. I'd do whatever I need to do, and then I'd come back. And I'd come back to this page. So you can see this is connected to my Runkeeper account, and it tries to load a certain base set of data. So just as the core of Keyring, after it makes a connection, it tries to get this set of data. And I've got a bunch of them because I was testing. And then as far as the importers go, so all of the ones that I've got, well, let's see them in here. So, see, Keyring is just a plugin and it's activated, and then Social Importers is just a plugin and it's a single plugin at the moment. And all it does is adds entries into your standard importers. And let's look at the Twitter one. And so I'm already connected. If I wasn't connected yet, basically the first screen would say, hey, you got to connect before we can do anything. And then it would push me off to Twitter. If I didn't have a connection yet, it would push me off to Twitter. And then once I confirm, I come back, and then I get to this, basically. If I've already got connections set up to Twitter, it just gives me a select box, and I can pick which one I want to use. And so then this is, some basic options about what to import and what to do with it. And it's it's checking automatically every hour when it's got a connection, or I can hit check for content now to get stuff as well.
And there's exporters as well? Like pushing content out?
So no. So the question is, are there exporters as well? So basically, I haven't written any. Using Keyring, you could pretty easily publish to anything that you have a connection to, because all of the authentication stuff is handled for you already.
Would you have a fuse breaker in case you were importing and exporting to the same server?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting concept. Actually, this is I refer to that as the social media singularity, and I envisage at some point someone will set up stuff that syndicates to each other, and they'll hit post on one thing, and the entire internet will go down because it'll all be trying to syndicate to each other. And I actually kind of ran into this a little bit, doing exactly that. Basically, I installed Jetpack, the plugin that I was talking about. I was doing some testing, and we recently added the publicize feature to it. So basically, as a new post is created, it automatically publishes it out to Twitter or something. And so I was doing some testing, and I forgot, and I left it connected to Twitter. And in the meantime, this thing's running in the background, importing my tweets. And so before I got back, it had imported a few and then tweeted them back out. And then luckily I caught it. I don't know if it would have kept, it probably would have kept importing them. Although this does have some basic duplicate detection, so it won't import the same content over and over. So like if I go back and restart the Twitter importer, it won't re-import all of my tweets, for example. But let's have a, I don't know if you can really see much of this. So this is actually the Twitter service for Keyring. Basically, it's the way it's all set up is a bunch of classes. If I'm getting boring for people, like just put your hand up or something. But basically, it's a bunch of classes that define an actual service. So in this case, Twitter. You can see that it extends OAuth 1 because that's what Twitter uses for authentication. And the OAuth 1 class actually extends a base service class, which just defines, you need to be able to do these things to be a service within Keyring. Stuff like get a request token, verify that that token works, make a request externally using that token. Bunch of endpoints, which are just what's required to actually do the authentication process, some handling of internal settings, because you actually have to create an account, an app on Twitter, which you connect to. That's how that works. It handles parsing responses, so I do everything in JSON for Twitter, and then by the time you get at it, if you're using Keyring within one of your plugins, by the time you get data back from Twitter, it's just an array of stuff. So you really don't have to think about response codes or authentication or any of that junk. You just ask Twitter for some stuff and you get an array of data back. This is the meta handling, so this is basically setting up all of that. My username, my sort of name that's used for display, and my profile picture and stuff like that. And then this is how do you render one of these tokens, and that's it. Like that's the extent of what you need to define to set up a new service within Keyring. And then to turn that into an importer is a little bit bigger. So that's the extent of the Twitter importer. Because it's all based off a shared code library, which does all of the normal stuff that an importer needs to do in this model. So there's there's a base class for the importers as well, which handles a lot of the UI redirection, the options handling, some of the parsing, and then you just sort of bolt on your service-specific importer stuff to that. So Keyring is actually what we're using at WordPress.com now. So every single thing on WordPress.com that interfaces with an external service, except for our commenting, uses Keyring now. So our importers have started using it. They're actually different importers to this. The importers use it. The friend finder stuff during sign up uses it. And definitely all of the publicize stuff uses Keyring. So it's being very actively developed, and I need to do a merge back to the plugin version. But I'm hoping to do that over Thanksgiving when I'm trying to get away from people. But basically, the code that you can run in Keyring is the same level of code that we're running on WordPress.com. And there's just a different layer of how to store all of the authentication information. Because at our scale, we have it in tables with millions of rows. At your scale, it'll probably just be saved in a custom post type and sort of hidden from the UI. So yeah, unless anyone else has any questions, I sort of powered through that. Yeah, question?
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand the concept better. Right now I just use iframes, the themes that use iframes, so you'll have like the tweets here in one frame and the comments in another. How do I explain to a client the main advantages of this system for myself?
So I guess the biggest, I'll leave that up, problem with the way that you're doing it at the moment is you don't control any of that content. Because you're loading it from an iframe, basically if Twitter goes down, you don't have your tweets. If they change their mind and decide that that widget, they're not going to support it anymore, then you don't have your tweets. And I use those two specific examples because they're both very prevalent. Twitter has had a history of going down, which admittedly they're much better at now, but it still happens, right? It's always going to happen. And they've recently started locking down a lot of their developer access and like the different ways that you're allowed to use Twitter data. And so basically if you're reliant on them, you're completely at their whim. And I'm not trying to pick on Twitter, it's the same for any service. It's just anyone who's running a web service where they control the data, like it's just a fact of life. They'll make decisions. Pardon?
Gets back to the first quote you had.
Yeah, it gets back to that quote. I mean, they're a business, your data is their business. And at the end of the day, they're going to make decisions that will affect you, not because they were doing it on purpose, just because that's what will happen. Question down here?
Have you ever thought about like the possible need, I don't know if there's really a need for this, but like supplying canonical URLs back to the source, like would there be any conflict having duplicate content as far as search engines are concerned?
So, possibly. I don't personally care because it's a personal website in my case. So I would assume that if anyone got penalized, it's probably going to be me rather than Twitter. I'm not sure what the answer is there. You could easily choose not to have permalinks on here or to sort of render the content differently so that you couldn't access it like within the page. You could render it in JavaScript or something if you wanted. Yeah, I'm not sure about the answer to that. From what I understand, the answer is probably that it's less likely to be an issue with smaller pieces of content, especially if you've got other stuff on that page, including comments and I don't know, links on the side and whatever. It makes it a little bit more difficult for search engines to say, oh, this is an exact copy of that thing over there, because that sort of nugget of content relative to the whole page is less. That's just a theory. Yes, you were first, I think.
On the duplicate content issue, usually if you penalize for duplicate content, it's only the duplicate content itself that's penalized. If you still have unique long form content there, then that shouldn't be penalized.
Okay. So only 11,000 of my 11,300 pages will get penalized.
You're far hosing your friends anyways.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you had a question.
I was thinking through this because because I was actually trying to give Overblog some advice today, and because they do create a lot of duplicate content. But if you think about it, if you have all of your tweets and Instagram and all of these things with a permalink that has your name in it, I think that's very good for SEO, because you have all these extra instances that are indexed on the, that actually get onto the internet, whereas a lot, for instance, your Instagram doesn't have your name on it, on permalink. A lot of the stuff that goes out disappears. Twitter doesn't. A lot of Twitter doesn't get indexed. Used to, it doesn't get indexed anymore. So this is really getting lots more instances of your name onto the web. So I think that it's SEO positive.
I honestly don't know. You may well be right. I hope you are.
But the duplicate part that I didn't like was they wanted to import your website too, which I think is stupid.
Ooh,
you don't
interesting.
You don't need that with WordPress. But for your social sites, I think that's
Yeah. The other option, of course, is just to not display any of this stuff. I could just as easily not make any of this content available through the front end of my WordPress install and only have it as a backup for me in the background, just because I want to have it, which is exactly what I do at the moment on my site that is live. All of my tweets are in there, going all the way back to day one, but they're excluded from all of the queries, so they're all just left in the back end.
But you could still make it public to the web. So
I could, yeah, if I want to, but at the moment I choose not to, just because the theme that I'm using on my website can't handle it, is what it comes down to. It makes my website an even worse experience than it already is. Yeah.
Would you do comment systems like OpenPay?
Yeah, I mean, you could put whatever you wanted on this thing. Or do you mean import them or use them on here? That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that. I'm not sure how you would do that exactly. Maybe use an excerpt from the post that you originally commented on and then post your comment as a comment. I don't know. Basically what it comes down to is I'm just using what WordPress gives me as far as it's got this top level concept of posts, and I create all this other stuff in other places that I feel is worthy of that concept as well, and so I'm sticking it in there. So what it comes down to is anything that's online that you create that you feel is sort of worthy of that distinction, you can probably get it in there in some way or another. And that's actually part of one of the things that I sort of comes to mind now when I start using a new service is before I really invest anything in it, I'll make sure that they've got an export method of some sort. Preferably a solid API, or like a really well-supported API, which most of these services do have. But actually Delicious has a pretty horrible API. And until recently, it was download your bookmarks as an XML file. That's it, like all 1,400 of them. But that's better than nothing. And actually for bookmarks, it's probably fine. So yeah, that's something to consider. Like when you start using a new service, if there's no way for you to get your data back out of it, you might want to reconsider. It might not be worth whatever it is that you're going to put into it. And it depends on the data, it depends on the service. But if you're going to invest a bunch of your life to create data for them to sell, at least make sure you can get it back. Yeah,
you mentioned there was some issues with this working out of the box for some themes. Is there a theme that it does work with?
To be honest, I haven't really looked. It'll work on anything. All it's doing is creating posts within WordPress. What it comes down to is that your website will just be a jumble of way too much data. If you do what I did and import every service that I've got importers for, and you're active on all of them, it'll just be way too much to be coherent on a single website.
Switch to 2012? 2011?
Actually, yeah. I think I can. I can do that. Okay. Where is my nuts? Oh, there it is. So 2012, activate. quite possible that it's got errors because it's trying to do stuff that is bolted into the theme at the moment. I think it's dead.
Okay, sorry.
I guess not.
Okay.
Yeah, but it works. Like, they're just posts. It just means that you end up like with a lot of posts that they're not formatted very well. You'd have to do a lot of custom styling on any other theme at the moment to make it vaguely useful.
So at the moment, this is mostly useful for like a backup on a standalone WordPress site, rather than a tool for showing posts on someone's site?
Probably, yeah. If you were selectively... Oh, it is working. Apparently it was just waiting to load like the Twitter embed or something. If you were selectively importing stuff, it would be much more bearable. I have a friend who's using it to just import his tweets on a slightly modified 2012, and it works fine. But so, as an example, like there's a tweet, there's a link, there's a tweet, that's a tweet. So most of it, it works. It's there. There's a tweet, photo from Instagram. I think I've actually got, oh no, there's a check-in. There's a check-in that should be loading a gravatar, but the internet's dead. But you don't get the maps, you don't get sort of the collapsing. On days, where I go out and I'll check in at like 6 places in a row, I would have 6 of these things in a row, which is kind of boring. Yeah, it works. It's all just posts.
As a journal, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, as a personal journal, it's like I find this stuff fascinating. And actually I've found myself now referring to my own content a lot more because I can actually find it. You can't search Instagram. You can't search your own tweets very easily at all. I can search my Flickr photos way easier through here than I can through Flickr. With all of the auto tagging and stuff, I can jump to a different tag and find stuff across all of those services that might mention the same thing, which you can't do otherwise. I actually just saw there's a startup called recollect.me, which launched recently, which is kind of eerie because it's basically this as a service, including like it's all the same services that I'm using. So it's kind of funny. So obviously like there's enough people out there who want to do stuff at least remotely like this that someone started a company to do it. Question?
Is Keyring going to get pushed publicly?
So Keyring's already available. So are the social importers. If you go to the .org repository and just search for Keyring, as far as I know, they're like the only 2 main results.
The social importers, if there was a service that someone wanted, so let's say that you guys didn't work on already, and someone else wanted to, do you guys have like a kind of roadmap set up?
When you say you guys, you mean me?
Well,
and no, officially I don't. But Keyring is built from the ground up, intending to be the foundation for other people's plugins. So the whole point of it is that anyone can build on top of it. And then the Keyring social importers are kind of the same thing. A little bit less so because they're a little bit more tightly coupled. And I haven't tried doing it as a separate plugin yet, but you could probably write a plugin that uses the social importer base class and then just is a completely separate plugin. So then you need Keyring, you need the social importers, install this other thing. But if people write them and like email me and want to put it in the package, I'll stick it in there.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because I know like a few developers that were kind of playing around with similar things and kept getting frustrated and kind of abandoning the projects.
Yeah, exactly. A bunch of the developers that I know, when I said, like, I've been talking about writing this since about 2009. So in those years of discussions, a bunch of people have said like, oh, that would be so awesome. Like, I want to do this thing, but I can't be bothered dealing with all of it. Or I can't be bothered with all of this other junk that I have to do just to get to the point of doing the interesting thing. So basically that's what I was trying to do. And yeah, that's the whole point. So please do, like, have them check it out. Someone's already volunteered that they want to integrate this on, I want to say it's an education blogging site. So they're interested in using Keyring as the foundation of all of their social stuff. So I'm trying to get a merge of the code on .com and the plugin done so that they're at a common code base, which will just make it a lot easier for people to contribute. think I saw one over there. Yep.
What's the email?
Oh, sorry. It's just Beau at Automatic with 2 T's. Yeah. Question?
For the photo services, does it actually import the media?
For like
For the image
Instagram
services,
and whatever? Yes, it
import
does.
the media, or does it just save the link?
So, if I can figure out where I am, if you look in my media library, bunch of photos. So it actually downloads all of them. So when you run the Flickr importer for the first time on 4,000 photos, it takes 36 hours.
Does it throttle the API calls?
It's sort of, especially with the photo ones, it's throttled just by the nature of how fast it can download the photos. But the way that all of the importers work is actually, so a few years ago I wrote the LiveJournal importer that's part of Core, and it uses the same kind of ghetto approach that uses, which is it does a bunch of requests, then it sits there and waits 10 seconds, then it reloads the page to a new URL. And that's actually a really horrible hack to get around memory leak in WordPress, but it works, and it sort of forces a little bit of throttling. The only, or the most aggressive API throttler of the ones that I've dealt with so far is Twitter. And I ran into their throttles a few times when I was really actively testing it. And like I would hit import and then notice a bug and cancel it, hit import, and it was doing a bunch of requests at a time. I've never come remotely near any of their limits other than that.
As you know, Google has a data liberation front.
Yeah.
You could describe this as a data liberation engine. Perhaps.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, the whole point is just get your data back from wherever it is. WordPress is, the whole point of WordPress is that it's open, the data is open. One of the things that's made it really successful over the years is being very open with its data, having both exporters and having really good importers from other services. So why not just take that to the extreme? Right. That's it.